Seattle rain taps lightly against the window pane, the wooden dining room facing straight onto the lake as if holding its breath. I ladle another scoop of chicken soup, the warmth fogging Grandpa Walter's glasses. His hand trembles. He smiles. Thank you. Then suddenly freezes. His gaze drops deep. The spoon falls with a clang onto the plate. I haven't even stood up when my mother-in-law points straight. Julia is poisoning father. Chairs scrape. The smell of rain mingles with the smell of fear. And Ethan, my husband, stands between two shores. On one side me, on the other, his family. I hear 911's cold tone over the speaker, hear my name miscalled into an accusation. But what saved me wasn't a long-winded defense. It was the Nanny-Cam hidden in the picture frame right on the cabinet and the toxicology test I quietly requested when I took him to the hospital. Cameras don't know how to take sides. They only keep the truth. From this minute on, I let procedure and timestamps speak for me. I am Julia, and tonight, on Revenge and Resolve, I will tell this story in full. Why a bowl of soup could break an entire dinner, why a house by the lake has too many whispers, and why SPD, APS, together with an estate attorney, spoke the words for me that my heart wanted to say, but my throat could not. I don't tell this to get even. I tell it to ease my heart, to let those who've been mislabeled know they can place a hand on their chest and know they're not alone. Thank you for being here, for giving me your time and your trust. If you believe the truth can stand on its own, stay until the end of this video. Hit like, subscribe, and comment "Lake" so I know you're still hearing me in this rain. To understand why a bowl of soup could break an entire dinner, we have to go back to the quiet days by the lake, where the digital photo frame began to see more. Seattle mornings always start with rain tapping softly on fir trunks and glass, like someone texting, "Wake up," with a warm finger. I pour boiling water over finely ground coffee, the fragrant black stream running through the paper filter. Steam fogging the kitchen window that looks out on Lake Washington laid out in slate. A raincoat hangs ready on a chair. Last night's wet shoes sit beside Grandma's hand-woven rug. I carry a canvas bag and walk to Pike Place Market, the fishmonger shouting loud, then tossing a silver fish into the air, the thump pleasing to the ear. I pick a bag of chicken bones for stock, add some onion and celery, fresh ginger to warm the stomach. Seattle taught me 3 things: patience, strong coffee, and rain that never gets tired. I moved to the lakeside to care for Walter, the man who taught Ethan how to take apart the lawnmower, how to catch a halyard again, how to listen to an engine, except his mother's heart. Inside, the stockpot sits patiently on the stove, bubbling tiny beads. The scent of ginger and chicken bones spreads through the wooden dining room. On the wall is an old photo of Walter in front of a Boeing shop. Work blues, crisply creased, eyes bright as if still seeing the future. Next to the armchair is the medication notebook he keeps himself. Big, clear letters, the hours divided by even ticks. The small bell next to the pillbox rings softly each time it's time, like a little bird, reminding of an appointment. The digital photo frame on the shelf keeps showing family pictures, Christmases by the fireplace, fishing trips on the lake, Ethan's hug for his grandfather. No one notices it is exactly the Nanny-Cam I set up to ease my mind when I step out of the kitchen. In the afternoon, Rosa, the caregiver, comes on shift. She sniffs around the kitchen and frowns slightly. "Ms. Julia, it seems like there's a smell of sleeping pills somewhere." I stop ladling soup, look around. That smell drifts lightly like a thin wisp of smoke, not the ginger I just grated. Walter sits by the chessboard, tapping a finger on the knight as if waiting for an opponent. "Don't forget more ginger, Julia," he says in a warm voice. "My arthritic knee remembers that taste." I smile. I won't forget, Grandpa. The hallway door clicks softly. Margaret walks in, dark sweater, eyes cold as the winter lake shore. "This house follows my menu," she says, each word dropping to the floor like pebbles. "You're just a long-term guest." I hear and don't answer, ladle another scoop of soup, set it before Walter, and remind myself, slow, clear, don't shake. As the rainy days stretch on, the story in the house frays into strands. Margaret holds a temporary power of attorney. She calls it to make it easier to take care of father, and starts talking more about putting Walter into a better care facility. I know that facility belongs to a chain in which she has an interest. At her recent charity dinners, their representatives always share a table. Now and then she drops a casual line. The family trust will have to go in the right direction as long as Dad is weak enough to rest. Ethan listens to his mother, eyes on the lake, hand unconsciously tracing the rim of his glass. I want to take his hand, but only slide the toast toward him, hoping the smell of butter will bring him back to the table. I learn the medication schedule like a song: morning, noon, afternoon, night. Each pill has its own color. I label the cabinet, photograph each pill tray, send them to the family doctor for confirmation. I recheck the bell alarm, see if the camera in the frame is still working, save each segment to a tiny hard drive. Every evening I sit with Walter. He tells stories of the old days when storms rose, planes screamed overhead, and he kept a steady hand on the controls. "Flying a plane is like keeping a home," he laughs. "Don't yank the yoke, just trim lightly." I know in this house there are hands wanting to yank hard. I choose to trim lightly, simmer another pot of stock, add another line to the notebook, place another tiny pair of eyes in the frame, and wait for the rain to tell me my time. Seattle rain fell evenly like a looping piece of music, and in that falling rhythm, small details began to slip out of line. Margaret told me, "Switch to a new sleeping medication so Walter is less agitated at night." She set on the table a shiny plastic bottle, the label brand new, her voice light as if recommending chamomile tea. I read the name of the drug, wrote it in the notebook, then said I would check back with the family doctor. She pursed her lips, waved it off. "Don't be fussy, Julia. I am an ICU nurse. I know sleepiness is different from sluggishness due to toxins." Grandfather's nodding of the head was not the same as fatigue. It was surrender. I made ginger tea, opened the window for air, watched the rain stretch long like an endless gray thread. The next day, on the spice shelf appeared a strange blue glass bottle. The label had been peeled off, leaving only a faint smear of adhesive. I opened the cap. A sweet, acrid smell rushed up like a reminder. I took a photo, recorded the time in the notebook, 14:07. In the afternoon, Margaret had an HOA meeting and then disappeared right during the busiest kitchen hours. Her phone was switched off like a door slamming shut. I checked the camera in the photo frame. The tiny red light was still on. The auto storage reported, "Okay." Rosa stepped in, smelled the strange odor, and murmured, "Ma'am, I'm not at ease." I nodded, handed her a cup of cinnamon tea, whispered, "You stay in the kitchen. You check the meds, you watch the pot. Leave everything else to me." I wrote one more line in the notebook. The fewer words, the clearer the paper. The rain kept on that night. The sound of a delivery truck stopped at the door near 10 o'clock. The courier wore a hood, handed over a white plastic bag stamped "Medicine 24/7, hurriedly signed on the screen. I received it, signed, then set the bag on the kitchen counter, took a photo, recorded the time. 21:46. In the bag were unfamiliar blister packs bearing Walter's name, the instruction line vague. I texted the family doctor. This order didn't go through the clinic. Please confirm. On the other end, they replied in the middle of the night. Not in the system. I felt a chill down my spine, as if I had just opened the window into a draft. The camera does not take sides. It had seen who opened lids, who sprinkled powder, and when he slumped. In the morning, Margaret pressed again. Walter needs to sleep more. His mind will be less foggy. I ladled soup, set a piece of toast next to him. Walter reached for the spoon, his eyes a little clouded but still with the familiar glint. Don't forget the ginger, Julia, he murmured. My arthritic knee remembers that taste. I smiled. I won't forget. I poured a little more warm water. Margaret stood right at the doorway, phone held chest high as if checking email, but the lens aimed straight at us. I had seen that phone at many dinners, sometimes live streaming flowers, sometimes recording memories. But today, it was a different eye. Near noon, Walter stood up from his chair to go to the window, touched the wooden sill where the old Boeing photo hung. At that very moment, he staggered. I rushed over, wrapped an arm around his waist, slipped a step because of the slick rug, then braced him back against the chair. The spoon clattered. My heart pounded like a drum. It's okay, Grandpa, it's okay, I said slowly. At the other end of the room, the click-click of the phone camera fired rapidly. Margaret lowered the phone, face blank like the lake on a windy day, dropped exactly one line. Julia made father fall. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it. Instead of arguing, I checked his pulse, measured blood pressure with the wrist monitor, recorded the time, 11:58. Walter breathed more evenly after a few minutes. I called the doctor, reported the situation, asked for further checks. I attached photos of the tubing, the blue bottle, the late-night delivery bag. Inside me, one part softened out of fear, one part hardened out of anger. But the largest part was still the calm the ICU taught me. Put the person first, set emotions aside, put the evidence in place. That night, I extracted the video from the frame, the wide shot from the soup pot to the moment I caught Walter, put it in a separate folder with date and time, and backed it up to a hard drive. I also saved the segment of Margaret raising the phone, clipped the image and the line, Julia made father fall, for comparison. Ethan came home late, his coat soaked. He looked at me, then at his mother, then at his grandfather, the gaze passing across each face as if looking for a handhold. Tomorrow, I said softly, we'll go see the doctor. And I'll call one more place. He asked, where? I answered, a place that knows how to listen to the truth. SPD, and a phone number a friend at the hospital gave me. APS. I poured him a cup of tea, the scent of ginger rising gently. Out there, the rain still fell, but inside me, a clock hand had clicked to the right mark. I knew this had gone far beyond the bowl of soup, and I was ready to put everything on the table without a shout, just papers with timestamps. I don't argue. I turn on the checklist. Camera, time labels, samples, chain of custody. The morning after his near fall, I put a new memory card into the digital photo frame on the shelf, the Nanny-Cam that looks like a harmless family frame. Tilt the angle slightly to see the whole kitchen, the soup counter, the stovetop, and the spice rack. The tiny red light comes on like a calm heartbeat. I download a simple medication tracking app, set reminders according to the doctor's schedule. Each time I take a medication, I snap a photo. The app auto-timestamps it. For the kitchen specifically, I buy a stack of colored stickers. Every stock pot is labeled clearly. Broth 7:40 a.m., Julia. Broth 12:15 p.m., Julia. Lid sealed. I ladle a small portion into a screw-top glass jar, mason jar. Label with the hour and minute. Then place it in the fridge compartment on the top shelf, dead center of the mini fridge camera I mounted in the afternoon, so that anyone opening the door will be in frame. No arguments, no chase, only documentation. I text Lena, an old friend in the hospital's forensics department. We meet at a cafe near Lake Washington's Seattle rain, fogging the glass. Lena shows me how to copy the video to a hard drive. She creates a chain of digital fingerprints, hashes, for each file to verify integrity later. She smiles gently. Don't be overly meticulous, just enough for the truth to have a seat. I go home, put the hard drive and notebook into a plastic box with a lock, tape on the date and time. Each evening, I extract the necessary clips, whose hands entered the kitchen, where the blue glass bottle was placed when the soup pot's lid was on. Everything goes into day-labeled folders, neat as a drawer of sweaters. As for testing, I don't take it upon myself to do anything excessive. I call Dr. Nair, the internist following Walter, briefly explain that I'm worried something is not right with him. He schedules a time at the hospital, guides me through the hospital's valid sample intake procedure. Containers must be clean and sealed, labels with time, the preparer's name, and the signatures of the handoff parties. I bring 2 labeled soup samples from home, kept in a small cooler bag. At admissions, I sign. Dr. Nair signs receipt. The nurse gives me a copy of the receipt. The receipt records the time and the handoff parties. The samples are sealed per protocol, chain of custody. No one asks for recipes or what substance. It's simply a safety check per medical orders to know whether there was something in dinner that shouldn't be there. I exhale when I see everything on the right track. Rosa helps too, in her quiet way. At each shift in-out, she signs the pre-printed log, adding a short line of description if she smells something odd in the kitchen, a sharp note like bitter almond, or gentle like sleeping pills. Just a human nose's impressions, no conclusions. I place the log right next to the glove box, visible to everyone, nothing hidden. On evenings when Margaret reports she's busy with an HOA meeting and turns off her phone right at kitchen hours, the cameras still run, the medication chimes still sound steadily. Walter still reminds me to add ginger, so the knee pillow feels less cranky. I simply ladle soup, write the time, and gently put one more label on the lid. I also photograph the late-night deliveries, especially the bags bearing unfamiliar pharmacy names. The photos with the phone's automatic timestamps are printed out and clipped together with the hospital receipts. Ethan begins to understand why I no longer argue every line with his mother. Each night he sits beside me, watches a few clips, stays silent for a long time, then says softly, "I'm sorry I hesitated." I hold his hand. "It's okay. We need to be clear-headed more than we need to be fast." Some nights the rain is thicker, wind lashing the wooden wall like someone knocking. I turn off the stove, check the locks, check the jar lids, check the red light on the frame once more. Then I write one last line in the notebook. 2232. All samples labeled, cameras functioning. He is sleeping peacefully. I turn off the lights and let the device's tiny blue glow blink like a firefly by the lake. The truth is not loud. It only needs inked timestamps and a 64 GB memory card. And when it is enough, it will know its own way to step into the dining room, calm as a bowl of soup just cooled, to speak for me the things my throat cannot. When everything had been put into the box, the night suddenly knocked with a kang from the spoon. That night, the rain fell thick like a drawn curtain. The lake darkened, the kitchen still warm with the scent of ginger. Walter sat upright, eyes pleased at the steaming bowl of soup. Margaret stepped half a beat ahead of me, ladled him a bowl, rich to Dad's taste, murmuring as if stroking, Let me, Julia. You've been tired all day. I stepped back one step, still watching the clock and writing in the notebook. 1942. Dinner begins. 10 minutes later, just as he set the spoon down, I saw his shoulders collapse, his eyes go heavy, his head slump to the right. Grandpa, I called, my hand already reaching to support him. The spoon fell kang. The sound of the rain suddenly seemed far away. I placed him on his side in a safe position, checked his pulse, called 911. My other hand pressed the house alarm. Ethan ran in from the living room, face pale, lips forming. Did you call yet? While Margaret stood straight like a dark streak in the doorway, already with her line. Wrong dose. She gave the wrong dose. The ambulance siren sounded faintly far off, then nearer, like a rope being pulled in, binding the whole house tight. Paramedics came into the house, raincoats still dripping, quickly asked about symptoms and the timeline. I handed over the medication record on the app, pointed to the times and the evening meds, keeping my voice steady as in the ICU. He ate soup at 1942, went limp 10 minutes later. No change in dose. Margaret cut in right on cue. She switched the brand of sleeping pill. I told. Then she steered the paramedic's gaze toward me as if leading a charge by the hand. I wanted to refute it, but hospital experience held me back. After emergency comes paperwork. They need a patient lying still and clear information. I helped secure him, handed over the insurance wallet, quickly tucked into his jacket pocket the slip listing drug allergies. The paramedic nodded, wrote, LOC, loss of consciousness, onset Pentenman post-dinner, applied electrodes, counted respirations, set the gurney. Ethan stood in the hallway like someone hit by two opposing gusts. I believe you, but Mom says this is criminal. I looked at him, not angry, only seeing an overgrown child searching for a handrail. Just follow the ambulance, I said. I'll come after, with the paperwork. At the hospital, the white lights made everything look sterile to the point of cold. Because I am a nurse here, the shift supervisor laid a light hand on my shoulder. Julia, to avoid a conflict, we'll temporarily take you off shift until things are clear. You are not being accused. You are family. I nodded, my heart twinging a little, not because I was suspended from the shift, but because I understood the thin border between work and my own home had just appeared, sharp as a blade. Behind the curtain, Walter was under close monitoring. Ethan sat with his knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the monitor screen. Margaret called non-stop, saying somewhere, Julia poisoned father, each sentence clear and even as if reading from a document. I sat down on the plastic chair, opened my phone, looked at the video kitchen cam 19 out of 20 Alcaine that had auto-synced. The frame had the entire kitchen, the soup counter, whose hands ladled, which lids opened. They write my name on the report, I thought. I write the truth onto the memory card. I went home when the rain eased, opened the fridge, took out 2 jars of soup already labeled with the exact time, checked the seals, put them into a small cooler bag along with the printed receipt I had prepared. I pulled the memory card from the digital frame, put it into a rigid envelope, signed across the tape seam, noted the time, 22:58. Rosa stood at the door, eyes red. I will testify you were in the kitchen the whole time. I squeezed her hand. Thank you. Everything will be on paper. We drove to meet Lena at a late open cafe. She took the envelope, checked the seal line, took photos, told me to keep a backup copy. Then I stopped by Dr. Nayer's on-call room. He, in a white coat, smoothed back his silver hair, signed for the 2 sample jars as instructed, handed me a copy of the receipt, and said, "We will let the process speak." I exhaled for the first time that night, feeling my lungs full. When I returned, the house was quiet as if it had just gone through a storm. I hung up my raincoat, turned off the stove, wrote one line in the end-of-day notebook. Samples submitted, video sealed, 2341. I looked out at the lake. The city reflected in the water like a faint promise. That night, I didn't need to justify anything. I only needed a glass jar, a 64 GB memory card, and black numbers on paper. The rest, from here, does not belong to shouting. It belongs to procedure, to the scent of ginger lingering in the kitchen, and to a truth quietly finding its way into the light. The hospital keeps him safe. The paperwork begins to speak. The morning after the rainy night, I sat in the hospital's stark white corridor, hugging the small cooler bag as if holding something fragile. Dr. Nair came out, gentle-eyed but brief. The results are in. The soup samples test positive for a sedative class. He set the summary down before me, explaining in language anyone could understand. It's a substance that makes people go limp, different from Walter's prescription, and the time of detection matches exactly the time labels on the sample jars I submitted. He pointed to each line. Jar 1940, jar 1215. All matching the frames the Nanny-Cam recorded in the kitchen. No need for hard-to-remember numbers, just a picture bright enough to be unmistakable. The hospital simultaneously forwarded the toxicology report to SPD-APS per protocol. I exhaled, feeling half of the trembling in my chest settle. The other half I brought to the small office of Ava Brooks, the attorney an older nurse had recommended. Ava listened to me tell it from the beginning without interrupting, then pulled out a sheet of paper and dialed right there at the desk. "We'd like to open a suspected elder abuse case," she said to the APS staffer, clearly stating Walter's name. "Requesting a temporary restriction on contact so he could rest." Done. She moved on to the power of attorney. The temporary POA Margaret holds has a big hole, a conflict of interest if she places Walter in a facility she's connected to. Ava underlined the 3 words conflict of interest, looked at me. "We won't argue in the kitchen. We'll let the law speak in the living room." The plan was drawn like a clock hand. Sunday, family meal, with relatives as witnesses. When everyone is seated, we will play the Nanny-Cam. Not angry, not accusatory, just to let the footage and the smell of soup tell it. In the afternoon, I worked with the third person in that 3-pronged arrow, Lieutenant Reyes of the police department. He spoke little, wrote much, his voice plain as pine wood. "We'll apply for a limited warrant," he explained, "only to collect what's necessary." The list was concise. The green glass seasoning bottle with the label peeled off, the late-night orders from the 24/7 pharmacy, and the neighbor's camera video showing who went in and out at the exact time the soup was boiling. I was grateful for that care. In matters like this, the slight nod of a straightforward person is warmer than 100 promises. Rosa signed the shift log as every day, adding a few short lines, sharp like bitter almond in the evening, and gentle like a sleeping pill the morning before. Lena came to my house late in the evening, sat at the dining table, plugged the hard drive into the laptop, checked the videos one by one. "The file hashes match," she said slowly. "No signs of edits." That sounded dry, but to me it was like a hand on my shoulder. Steady. I printed the confirmation, set it next to Dr. Nair's summary, the APS receipt, and the seizure order copy det. Reyes had just sent. On top, I placed the photo of Walter smiling in front of the Boeing shop to remind myself of the purpose of all these seemingly cold measures, to protect a person. In the days that followed, the lakeside house was quieter than usual. Margaret was absent a lot, saying packed meeting schedule. Ethan grew pensive, but stopped straddling the middle. He read through the reports with me, asked, What does this word mean? And nodded when he understood. I cooked less soup and set more pots of ginger water, as a way to warm the gaps. Sunday came, rain light as breath. The table was simply set. Bread, clear soup, and a bottle of water. I had the small remote ready in my jacket pocket. Relatives trickled in, talked weather, talked Seahawks. I poured tea and smiled. My heart as calm as the lake when the wind has shifted. In the ICU, what saves a patient is protocol. Steps even and sure, leaving nothing out. In a family, what saves the truth is the discipline of evidence. Pen-marked timestamps, labeled glass jars, a 64-gigabyte memory card, and people willing to sit and listen to each other. When everyone was present, I looked around the table, put my hand on the remote, and said a sentence small enough not to shatter the air. Please, let's rewatch the previous night's dinner. Then I pressed. And let the footage begin to do the work my throat had struggled to do for so long. The safety plan was drawn. On Sunday, we let the video retell it right there at the dining table. Sunday dinner was set simply as always. Clear soup, toasted bread, a pot of cinnamon tea, the sound of Seattle rain tapping evenly outside the porch. Relatives filled the long row, a few friendly neighbors in the seats at the end. In the next room, a door left a small crack, where DT Reyes and APS staff had already been seated by prior arrangement, quiet as pins holding down the edge of a tablecloth. Margaret spoke first, her voice soft as wax but cold as the lake. This family has its code, and when someone does wrong, we do not stay silent. She glanced back at me. Julia made father lose consciousness. No one shifted a chair. Only the clock beat out 7:30 like knocking on my knees. I did not answer. I reached for the remote, turned on the TV. The screen switched to AirPlay. The kitchen corner came up. The digital photo frame on the shelf had seen everything. Video 1 played slowly, the background sound the rain falling on the roof. Margaret lifted the lid of the pot, steam fogging her glasses. Her ringed hand pulled from the spice shelf a green glass bottle, the label half peeled. She sprinkled a fine powder into the pot, stirred, wiped her fingers with a tissue, looked around as if checking, then ladled the first bowl, set it on a tray, and carried it to Walter. I heard myself off-screen say to him, "I just added ginger. Taste it, Grandpa." The video stopped. The room kept its breathing rhythm. I switched to video 2, a close-up of the green bottle set next to the pot, the glue from the label still clinging. Margaret's back casting a long shadow across the kitchen tiles. In the background, the clock went tick-tock, the minute hand matching exactly the label I'd stuck on the sample jar, 1942. The audio was recorded from a distance, but clear enough to hear Rosa ask, "What's that strange smell, Mrs. Sloane?" Margaret paused a beat and then deflected, covering the bottle with a towel. I turned the video off. The rain on the porch seemed to stop for a moment. Margaret clenched her napkin and sprang to her feet. "This is staged." She hurled a look through the screen as if she could burn the HDMI cable itself. I spoke slowly. "Mother, this file bears an integrity hash, a string of numbers anyone can check to know it hasn't been altered. The chilled soup samples I kept have time labels that match the footage. The hospital's tests say there's a sedative class, not in Grandpa's prescription. What else doesn't match?" "Mother?" I didn't press. I just laid down each stone on the floor for everyone to step over. Ethan came apart like a snapped cord. "Mom, why would you do that to Grandpa?" His voice was hoarse, his hand still unconsciously smoothing the edge of the tablecloth. A few relatives bowed their heads. The elderly neighbor sighed. In the next room, the door opened a little wider. "Detui." Reyes stepped out, removed his cap, and said gently, "Sorry to interrupt. Under elder protection protocols, we need to seize the green bottle and related parcels. Here's the paperwork. He set the document on the table, not looking at anyone for too long. The APS worker stood beside him, a warm voice. From now on, we will temporarily limit contact with Walter until the doctor allows it. He will be cared for under the agreed safety plan. In the corner of the room, a small TV that had been playing the Seahawks game automatically froze on a commercial frame, as if it too were holding its breath. I looked around and caught Walter's gaze in the old Boeing photo hanging on the wall. The same bright gaze as if telling me, "Don't yank the yoke." I turned to everyone. I don't want our home to become a brawl, but I can't leave the truth under the table. An aunt trembled. "Julia, are you sure?" I nodded. Rosa stepped half a pace forward, hand to her chest. "I was on the evening shift. I smelled something odd. I will testify." Lena, seated behind, lifted the packet of video attestations slightly. "These clips are original. There are no signs of edits." The pieces touched and made a dry click. Margaret turned, as if searching for an exit among all the eyes. She started to say something, then swallowed it. I believe, in that moment, silence was harder than any defense. Dit Reyes nodded as a close. "Thank you all for your cooperation. Any further statements, please make them at the station per procedure." The APS worker scribbled a few quick lines, handed Ethan the temporary plan, visitation schedule, point person, hotline number. I took his hand. My mother-in-law sat down, the chair creaking softly like a catching breath. Dinner ended with no one washing dishes right away. I gathered the time labels, stuck another sheet on the document box. Presented 1857-1920, Sunday. I turned to everyone and bowed my head. "Thank you for staying. I know this isn't easy for anyone." On the porch, the rain resumed, small and even. In my chest, my heartbeat evened out too. I didn't defeat anyone. I only put the truth in its proper place, at the center of the table, in front of the grown-ups, and beneath an honest clock. And that very seat tonight began to turn into justice. After the truth sat down, the law stood up. The morning after that dinner, the house by the lake was as quiet as a page waiting for a seal. APS staff returned with a stack of papers, thin but heavy, a safety plan specifying each step and each person responsible. And at the top of the page, a temporary order requiring that Margaret not make contact, not call, not come near Walter until the court reviews. I read line by line and felt a layer of lead lift from my chest. From now on, caring for him would no longer have to pass through sharp gazes, no longer the barrage of calls at kitchen hour. Late morning, dit-il, Reyes arrived with a female colleague, knocking softly as if asking permission to step into our very truth. He showed me the seizure warrant, the green glass bottle with the label peeled off, and the authority to inspect the medicine cabinet. Everything proceeded slow and clear. No one raised a voice. They gloved up, placed the bottle into an evidence bag, photographed the scene, logged the time. When she opened the wooden cabinet by the kitchen, the colleague paused a beat and added to the report the locations of the unfamiliar blister packs. I stood a little back, feeling as if the house could finally breathe with both lungs. At the hospital, Dr. Nair had filed the toxicology summary into the chart, his voice over the phone still low and steady. "We don't use words that frighten families, but the results are sufficient for investigators to consider tampering with food, with potential harm." I set the phone down and watched Walter sleep, his breathing even like a boat coming into harbor. In the afternoon, Ava Brooks pulled a chair up to the dining table, spread out a printout thicker than a paperback. A petition to the elder court, with a request to temporarily suspend Margaret's power of attorney for conflict of interest. both holding the right to decide for him and wanting to place him in a facility from which she would benefit. "We're not arguing feelings," Ava said. "We're just asking the court to return a straight line to the care." In the small courtroom, the judge glanced through the file, asked a few brief questions, and struck the gavel. "Temporarily suspend Margaret's POA. Appoint Ethan and me as joint healthcare proxies, each decision to be dual-signed, and assign Ava to oversee the portions related to the family fund to prevent another invisible hand." I didn't cheer. I only lightly held Ethan's hand. He nodded, eyes wet, and said, "Tonight I'll sleep in the chair by Grandpa." As we stepped into the hallway, the few brick steps seemed brighter. On the civil side, Ava also filed to maintain caregiving authority for me during the investigation, along with a claim for damages for the false accusations and the long days that scraped my spirit raw. "Not to punish anyone," she said, "but to remind that words have weight and that weight must be borne." I understood. I had lived through nights sitting alone in the kitchen, listening to rain beat the glass and thinking I might shatter with each drop. Those lines of text, strangely enough, stitched me back together with the needle and thread of procedure, signatures, and timestamps. Toward evening, Deini Reyes reported briefly, the search warrant executed, the green bottle and the pharmacy's night deliveries seized, the neighbor's camera confirming Margaret coming and going at the very hour the soup was boiling. Rosa signed to attest to the strange smell. Lena submitted confirmation that the video's identification hash matched the original state. No edits. Everything slid into a thick file folder, but when I held it, it felt lighter than any argument I had ever imagined. Walter opened his eyes and asked softly, "Is it raining today, dear?" I smiled. "Only lightly, Grandpa." Then I told him how the court had set things back in order, like a captain correcting the compass. He closed his eyes, his lips murmuring, "Good." I suddenly understood. Some storms don't need you to shout into the wind. You only need to raise the mast again, tighten the lines. That night, I set the file folder on the wooden table, next to the half-finished cup of ginger tea. I wrote a short line in my journal. APS, safe, SPD, seized, court, joint proxies, hospital, report, civil, in motion. Then I repeated to myself the closing line of my life these past months. Justice doesn't pound on the door. It walks in with a thick case file and a hash that cannot be denied. When the storm recedes, what remains are the kitchen, warm porridge, and the people willing to relearn how to trust one another. Morning at Lake Washington, the rain is only like a thin mist on the surface of the lake. Walter leans on Rosa's arm to practice short steps along the hallway. The small radio plays the Seahawks game softly, the commentator's voice like a count for each step. I stand at the stove stirring a pot of oat porridge, the scent of cinnamon spreading to warm the whole room. Ethan comes over. His hand stalls and then he hugs me tight. "I'm sorry for being slow to believe you." We begin family therapy every Wednesday, learning to pause a beat before judging, learning to say, "I'm afraid," instead of throwing out an accusation. The digital frame on the shelf still glows, but now it only shows photos. Walter smiling in front of the Boeing plant, Rosa sticking her hand into the frame to make an OK sign, Ethan and I carrying bowls of soup out to the porch on a rare sunny afternoon. The memory card has been put away where it needs to be. The kitchen returns to its normal function. To feed everyone safely, not to stand guard. On the cabinet, the timestamp labels from those days have now turned into recipes. How many slices of ginger? Salt only up to here. Simmer on low heat for 20 minutes. Seattle taught me that rain can last an entire season, but then the lake's surface also calms. For me, best revenge, living well. A steady kitchen, a hot cup of coffee, and the person I love still opening his eyes and smiling after dinner. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story on revenge and resolve. Each view, each message from you is a gentle hand on my shoulder on cloudy days. If this story gives you a bit more courage to record the truth and stand on the right side, please hit like, subscribe so you don't miss the next journeys of family justice. We'll meet again when the sky clears.